Aloha, welcome to today's edition of Life in the Law. My name is Carol Mon Lee and I'm your host. Today I have the pleasure of welcoming an old friend, Lou Erteschik from the Hawaii Disability Law Center.
Right.
And thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you. It's nice to have you. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Great. So the Hawaii Disability Rights Center, I got it wrong.
Right.
Hawaii Disabilities Rights Center has been around for a long time. So why don't you give us a little background about what it is and what it does?
The Hawaii Disability Rights Center is part of a nationwide system called the Protection and Advocacy System, which actually started back in the 1970s. So there's an agency like us in every state.
And protection and advocacy.
Right. That's the term that the federal government uses, and then if you actually look in the U.S. Code, that's what the law is called, the Protection and Advocacy System. So it goes back to the 1970s when actually Geraldo Rivera, when he was a young reporter, did an expose on a facility in New York called Willowbrook, which is where people lived, and the conditions were horrible. So he went in there, filmed it, exposed it, talked to people. Robert Kennedy was a senator from New York at that time, and he called it a snake pit. And essentially what happened is that Congress was pretty shocked when they saw the conditions there, and so they decided that they would create a law and a nationwide system so that every state would have an agency as part of this protection and advocacy system, whose job it would be to go in and monitor these facilities to make sure that people who were living in these institutions were not being abused or mistreated or neglected in some way. And so every state designates an agency. We were designated by Governor Ariyoshi a long time ago. And then once you're designated, it's very difficult to get undesignated. And so we've been around for a pretty long time, actually, yes.
So these facilities, I assume because of the titles, for people with disabilities?
Right. I mean, in some cases, some facilities house people that are now called intellectually disabled, or what they used to call mentally retarded. There are facilities that house folks with mental illness. We've actually come a long way. I mean, so initially, this nationwide system was created to monitor these facilities, and we still do. We go into the Hawaii State Hospital, for example, on a regular basis. We are allowed under federal law to show up and go in and monitor, although we try to have a pretty good relationship with the people who run these facilities. But we go in there and we just poke around, monitor, make sure people are being treated properly. But the disability movement in general has come a long way, so a lot of these folks now reside in the community in a more integrated fashion. They don't really reside in the institutions anymore.
So so in the past, the tradition was that people with disabilities and whatever they called it, whether it was mental, were warehoused almost,
They
right?
really were, absolutely, absolutely. And
now we're moving to...
no question about it. I mean, that's been a huge evolution. Part of it is time and like lots of civil rights movements, people's consciousness about that has evolved. And so at one time, I think people thought, well, how could these people possibly live outside the institutions? But if you look at it, I mean, here in Hawaii, the old Waimano Home School, training school up on Waimano Home Road used to house folks with developmental disability. That's closed now. And so we now have an entire system of community-based care homes where people live. Either there's some homes you have two folks that are DD, some have 5. It can vary depending on the license. But a lot of these people, most of them are now out there living in the community. And the other thing that spurred that was the Supreme Court decision in the Olmstead case about 15 years ago, which essentially said that folks with disabilities have a right to live in sort of like the least restrictive environment and the most integrated environment that their doctors feel they can live in. And so we've come a long way, actually, in terms of housing and providing for people with disabilities.
Well, I want to go back for a second then. So first let's describe or define disability. So is there a federal definition of disability that we follow, or every state has to?
Well, there's the ADA definition, certainly.
The ADA,
so that would be kind of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Right.
So that would be kind of a threshold definition.
And what is the definition?
Well, essentially, I mean, without trying to be too legalistic about it, I mean, it basically says that if you're restricted in certain, in like one or more of what they call activities of daily living, which could be a lot of different things, that if you're substantially impaired in some activities of daily living, then you would likely qualify as an individual with a disability. So it's a pretty broad term. There was the original ADA, and then there were a bunch of U.S. Supreme Court cases that actually whittled that back a little bit. And so a few years ago, Congress passed the ADA Amendments Act, where they then said that, no, this is what we meant, this was actually our intent, and so they re-expanded the definition. So it's a pretty broad definition of having a disability,
So having a
physical,
disability,
intellectual.
right, and so is it something that is temporary, or does it have to be permanent? Does
Typically, it has to be a little more permanent. So
Mhm.
if you just kind of like broke your arm, but it's healing,
Right.
you might not be
You're
considered.
short-term disabled, but may not fall under the ADA.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain nuances in the law where a short-term disability could theoretically qualify as a disability, but less likely, I would say. I mean, it's meant to be something that's more of a chronic, long-term. Even like Social Security for their use of something that's likely to at least last a year. So there typically would be some sense of that, yes.
And how many people in Hawaii do we have that fall in?
I think the estimate is that we've got between 150 and 200,000 people. It's a pretty large chunk of the people actually would fall within that definition.
So that many people, more than 10% of our population
right.
in Hawaii.
It's good 10-15%, yeah.
Falls within the disabled. And so can you describe more specifically than some of the disabilities you mentioned in daily living, inability to?
Sure, the program, I mean, the national system that we're a part of started out really geared towards the folks with intellectual disabilities, was kind of what they used to call retardation.
Right.
And then it expanded to cover mental illness, because there's a clear difference. I think to lay people, sometimes they're not always clear on what the difference might be, but a mental illness would be something more like with a mental health diagnosis, like bipolar or schizophrenia, versus retardation, you know, would involve sort of a diminished IQ and things like that. So there's that, and then the program's expanded to cover folks with physical disabilities, people in wheelchairs, everything for diabetics, or any kind of physical illness. And then we also cover things like brain injury, which is an area that traditionally fell into a gap group, because these are folks who were not intellectually disabled, they weren't mentally ill, and yet they would exhibit symptoms and behaviors that would often appear to be like that. And so they would kind of present that way, but there was no pool of funding. The way the federal government tends to fund these things, for better or worse, often is focused on what the disability is. So if you have intellectual disability, there's this government bureaucracy that oversees it and funds it. Mental illness is over here. Brain injury was sort of nowhere for a long time, but that's kind of coming into it.
So it's actually a moving target though, right? So some people can come in later in life, become disabled, and other people maybe be
sooner or later, if we live long enough, we're probably going to all end up as being a person with a disability. Actually, yes. I mean, now, right, to be considered a person with a developmental disability, there you have to be someone where it manifested itself prior to the age of 22. So typically, they're getting at more like birth defects and things like that, But no, to be a person with a disability in general, yes, it wouldn't matter.
Okay, so I understand. So now who could come under your program, Hawaii Disability Rights Center, and about the size of the group. So now your program, the center is funded by?
Mostly by the federal government.
Federal government.
Right, the federal government funds everyone. As I say, there's one in every state, and even in some places like Guam and areas like that, and the Virgin Islands has one. So the federal government funds the bulk of it. We used to receive state monies years ago, little by little, between cutbacks and things like that. The state money was taken away. We do get some funding now from the Indigent Legal Assistance Fund that the Bar Association, the Hawaii Justice Foundation administers, because every time a lawsuit is filed, there's money that goes into a pot into the special fund, and agencies like us, Legal Aid and Domestic Violence Center, we all get some of that. So we get that.
How
but
big
most,
is your funding? Well,
our money from the federal government is approximately between $1.5 million and $2 million a year, I would say.
and that funds your staff and then, because of course, obviously, the actual care that is taking place is separately funded.
Yeah, the people that are the caregivers are not connected to us at all. No, I mean, so they would be funded. A lot of times, I mean, they're funded really in a couple of ways. Like, let's say you're running a care home. Some of them are what they call private pays. So you simply take in people and charge them what you want to charge or what you think you can charge, and they pay to stay there just like they would for anything else. Otherwise, Medicaid is a large source of funding for people that don't have any money left. Medicaid covers the cost of a lot of care homes, and so that would be separate, yes.
So then with your funding, you have an office of about how many people?
We have a staff of just under 20 people.
And does that include neighbor island visits and?
Yes, it includes
supervising?
neighbor islands. We used to have literally offices on the neighbor islands. Now we service every island from Honolulu, but we have a lot of advocates. We have a few attorneys, but we work mostly with advocates, and they routinely go to the neighbor islands for meetings and follow up, and so we service everybody all over the state. Yeah.
So give me an example. So someone comes in, let's say I have a cousin with a disability, and how would that cousin use your services then?
Well, it would depend on what the need was, obviously. But when we do a lot of individual casework, some of the things that we do involve trying to get benefits for people that they might be entitled to, but that somehow they're not getting. So let's say, for example, they have a developmental disability, but they go to the state health department that administers that program, and they want to get benefits, and they say you're not eligible, because typically what happens is the government that runs the program will say, well, you don't meet the criteria, you're not severe enough, you're not impaired enough. And so we end up then maybe taking that to an administrative hearing, or we might take that, we might just try to negotiate something. So that would be one kind of example. We do a lot of special education work where children who have these needs are getting special ed. They have what they call IEPs, or individualized education programs. And so we have advocates who go and meet and try to argue that they need to get more services. Those are just a couple of basic examples, yes.
So each of your advocates has a list of clients?
They have a caseload.
Caseload, and
They
about
do.
how many cases do they?
Oh my, I mean,
manage?
in the course of a year, we probably handle over 1,000, between 1,000 and 1,200 cases. So they each have a case. They have to be supervised by attorneys, and so they are acting under the supervision of an attorney, but so they're not really practicing law per se, but they are attending meetings and advocating for these people to try to argue that they should be getting more of this or less of that and things like that, right?
Okay. Very interesting. Hold that thought. We're going to take a short break.
Okay.
We'll be right back. This
Okay.
is Carol Mon Lee with Life in the Law, and my guest, Lou Erteschik. We'll be right back. Thank you.
Okay, this is Think Tech Hawaii, and it's Wednesday. Every Wednesday is Energy Wednesday here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy. 4 to 5 p.m. every Wednesday. Come and listen to us. And just to show you what I mean, I'm going to ask Sharon to tell us more.
Come and see us every Wednesday, as Jay said. And we have people like Jim Albers from HECO here, and co-host Ray Starling here every Wednesday. We not only go on Olelo and OC16, but also stream live. So please come visit us, hear about the latest in clean energy.
Okay, Jim, you've been here. You got any comment on all this?
As important as energy is in all of our lives today, this is a great forum and a great format to vet those issues. So I encourage everybody to listen in and participate.
Okay, Ray, what do you think for a close?
Well, I think this is the greatest show in the energy world here in Hawaii. You can come here every week, 1 hour, and catch the latest on what's happening and hear from the people who really know what's going on, like Jim Alberts. We appreciate your coming today.
Thank you.
Ray Starling, Sharon Moriwaki, Jim Alberts. at J. Fidel here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy, 4 to 5
Aloha.
p.m. Wednesday. Aloha.
Aloha.
Welcome back. This is Carol Mon Lee with Life in the Law, and my guest, Lou Erteschik, who is the Executive Director of the Hawaii Disability Rights Center here in Honolulu. Thank you, Lou. We were talking a lot about the Hawaii Disability Rights Center, how it is structured and how you get clients. Do you call them clients?
Yes, sure,
Yes.
we do, yes.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about that. I'm wondering, once the, so is it that a disabled person would only come to you if he or she has a problem, not necessarily just because she might have a disability? Is that right?
Well, yes. I mean, I guess that's true. I mean, like anything else, I mean, you and I are both lawyers. I mean, one of the things you learn as a lawyer is that, I mean, I used to be in private practice years ago, is that nobody comes by just to say hello, right? They
don't wanna pay.
They come by because they got a problem. It's
I
just
see.
like you go to the doctor when you're sick. So you come to you go to a lawyer when you're in a jam or you got a problem. So people come for specific reasons.
But there's no charge?
There's no
because
charge.
the government
No, we're
is-
free. The services are absolutely free, 100% free, because we are government funded. It's a little like legal aid in that respect,
I see.
except that I mean we only handle issues pertaining to disability,
Right.
and we don't have an income limit, an income requirement. At legal aid, I believe you've got to be below the poverty level. Here, in theory, even if you were above the poverty level, we could still represent you, and it would still be no charge.
So how does the homeless situation affect what you do?
Well, we represent some of those people. I mean, not so much in like the current litigation that the ACLU has against the city, but we have clients that are homeless. A lot of the homeless folks are clearly mentally ill, and our mental health funding for our program is our largest grant. We probably do more cases regarding mental illness than anything else. So we're sort of immersed in it that way, I guess. Yeah.
Do you actually go out into the streets? Do you have your advocates going?
The advocates will often go and meet their clients wherever it's most convenient. I mean, a lot of the cases are not necessarily with homeless folks, so in which case the client may come to the office. We have homeless people who come into our office. I mean, a lot of them are right outside the building, so it certainly is there. Our advocates sometimes will go meet somebody at a McDonald's and have coffee with them and discuss it, or go to their home. So we're not like a crisis or an outreach service to the homeless population. I mean, we're more of a law firm than a social services agency. So it's not our job as such to necessarily go out and get them into treatment or get them services. We generally would respond to a request for help and then take it from there.
But has any of the city and county or the different agencies that are involved in helping the homeless partnered with you in terms of getting services to them?
Yeah, in some respects it has. I mean, less so on the individual case issue, more so, I guess, maybe on a larger systemic scale, where one of the things that I do is go up to the legislature and we don't lobby, but we try to be a resource to legislators as they're contemplating different policies that they might want to make. And there were laws on involuntary medication and things like that. And so we did help a couple of years ago craft a bill on an assisted outpatient treatment bill that would make it a little bit easier for people who are trying to help that population get them into treatment without necessarily going so far overboard that you may be trampling on people's civil rights.
I see.
And so we worked with the Attorney General's office. We worked with people like who run IHS and other stakeholders to try to come up with some kind of a consensus about how we could achieve this. So we do collaborate in that respect, yeah.
Do you, in addition to being an advocate for certain issues, do you actually do placements for them? Do you find them placements?
No, we try to help them. I mean, we're not case managers either, and we're not discharge planners like from a facility. So we're not necessarily the people that would go and find them a place. What we would do is make sure that the people who do have the responsibility to do these things do them.
And who are they in this state?
So let's say let's say using that example, like a hospital discharge planner would be obligated to try to find you a place when they discharge you.
And this person has a disability,
Right,
a
they're
long-term
not,
disability.
right, they're not really just supposed to dump you on the street, right? I mean, they're actually
Right.
supposed to make sure you either go home safely and people know what to do, or if you need to go to a care home, that they find you a care home before you leave the hospital. So we had some cases, I mean, years ago, for example, we had a bunch of issues where Queens Hospital was routinely sending people to facilities in Ohio. I mean, it was pretty outrageous. I mean,
We didn't have anything in Hawaii for them
we
to
do,
go to?
we
You mentioned Waimanu Home.
well, Waimanu Home Road was more of a facility for people with developmental disabilities. A lot of the people, and this problem has been somewhat solved, but it's a pretty good example of the kinds of things that we might do, and also the kinds of problems that we do have looking down the road. I mean, there is an issue about a lack of capacity in the community to take care of folks with disabilities. I mean, again, think about it. I mean, as we age, you've got an increasing aging and disability population. You have a lot of the caregivers themselves are aging. A lot of those women who run the care homes out in the central part of the island are getting older. They're retiring. Their children may not necessarily want to go into the same kind of work. So there's a question of how much capacity are we going to have in the community. So in the case of like a hospital and a discharge, the issue really then is they got to find a care home that is willing to take that person.
So that's what your advocate will do?
So we would, right, so we might get a call from somebody saying, I'm at the hospital and they want to put me out, and I don't want, I can't do that.
I have no place to go.
I got nowhere to go, and then we would say, well, their job is to make sure that you do have a place to go, and so we will step in and either send an advocate or somebody, and then meet with them and say that you've got to find them a place, and that's what we would try to accomplish, right?
And how long do you stay involved with the individual, the client,
Well,
until he or she is placed, and do you check on
Yeah,
them
I mean,
regularly?
typically it's handled so that until we think we've accomplished what it was that we set out to accomplish, we don't. When the case is closed, we typically would close it as a file, and so we
Meaning
would.
in this case, they found a placement.
If they find a placement, then we say, okay, fine, right, and so we would generally close the case. Would we check on the person? I mean, sometimes you would, just as a matter of. Like anything else, we all take an interest in the work that we do. We care about the people that we're helping, and so we might very well go out and check on somebody, see how they're doing, but that wouldn't necessarily be within the scope of what the case was about originally.
I see. So in addition to legislation, promoting legislation, do you get involved in any court cases?
Sure. Yeah.
Can you give me some?
Sure.
bigger ones?
We've handled. Some are smaller cases, but we've been involved in several large-scale like class actions. We brought one of our big cases several years back was called the Macon case, and we brought that against the Developmental Disabilities Division at the Health Department because they were not providing services fast enough to people. There was a long wait list to get services, so people would be qualified for service, and they would say, "Yeah, you're eligible." But you're like number 1,000 on the list, so we don't have enough money, and so you got to, you can wait your turn until everybody else is off, and then we'll get to you. And so we brought a case, and as a result of that case, then they know there's no more wait list. If you qualify for services, they have to provide within 90 days of being found eligible, they got to start providing you services. And so there's no
And
more
what
wait
kind of
list.
services are we talking about?
Well, they would get, typically the idea is to keep people in the community. Remember, we were talking about Olmsted and the closure of the facilities.
Right.
So the idea is that it's not that you don't need care. You can just get it out in the community. So instead of being in the facility, you're living in a care home. But maybe you might need a worker, what they call like a personal assistant, or somebody to come in and help you with some of your activities of daily living. Maybe some people need it. Maybe you need help getting dressed and taking a bath in the morning, so you can get on the road and go and get going. A lot of these folks go to these day programs where they get socialization with their peers. And so all these services, the DD division at the health department would have a case manager who would...
DD?
Developmental disabilities.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, government has lots of acronyms,
Yes.
right? So they would set up, they would have a case manager who would go in and assess the situation, and they would say, okay, yeah, you need this, you need that. And so we would make sure that they're getting the services. So those services there used to be a waiting list to get those services. But now, as a result of the lawsuit that we brought, there is no more wait list. So this forced them to get more money from the legislature, because this is a Medicaid program. And so if it's a Medicaid program, the federal government pays roughly half of that. It's like a 50-50 match. So, but the state's got to kick up more money to get the match from the federal government, and then to increase the number of people they can serve.
So that's not your responsibility to find how it's paid. You just need to make sure they are on the ball, identifying those.
Right. I mean,
financial
obviously they need to get the money from the legislature. I mean, the administrative branch cannot always guarantee that they're going to get it, obviously, and so that's always a bit of a tricky area of the law, how far can you force them. But I guess my experience, I mean, I worked at the health department for a long time. I think what happens is that when you are under a court decree to do something, quite frankly, it gives you a lot of good ammunition when you go to the legislature.
Right.
And you say you gotta fund this thing because the court said we gotta do it. And so it's always been kind of an irony to me that people in state government don't like to get sued, and they take it personally and things like that. But in truth, sometimes getting sued is the best thing that could happen to their program, because then that gives them exactly the leverage and the club that they need to go and get the money from the legislature. So that's pretty much what happened with that case, I would say. Yeah.
What other challenges has the Hawaii Disability Rights Center faced in terms of whether it's funding or?
Well, our funding is actually not in bad shape at the moment. The federal funding, I mean, there have been some funding challenges. I mean, there was the sequestration at the federal level.
Right.
That was looking like it was going to really freeze the funding, and so our funding has been pretty plateaued for the last several years. We haven't really gotten any increases. And when we lost all our state general funds, then we were looking, I mean, we had to make some adjustments, but we didn't have to lay off anybody. And we try to be careful. I mean, we try to be pretty frugal about how we use our money. And I have an operations director that works there, and she's really excellent at that. And
do you find your caseload, for instance, expanding because, in this case, the homeless in Hawaii seems to be a growing population, or those kinds of challenges?
Well, the caseload, I mean, expands in part also because we try to do more outreach. And so, I mean, one of the things we want to do is let people know that we're there. And so we do some advertising, like on the bus, I think particularly we have a program to address. Under the Help America Vote Act, we have some funding to address polling places and accessibility issues, and helping people with disabilities, figure out how to vote and to use the different machines. So we try to do that. Whenever I do any kind of outreach such as this, the intent is not so much to focus just on us that way. It's the idea is to let people know that we're there.
You're out there.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, because we are free, I think we do a good job, and this is a population that really has a lot of needs.
Really does.
I mean, if you're a person with a disability, you've probably gotten a bit of a bad break in life, and so we help some of the most needy people that there are. And so what we want to do is make sure that they know how to get to us. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. We're going to take one more break,
Okay,
Lou.
sure.
And we'll be right back. This is Carol Mon Lee with my guest, Lou Erteschik from the Hawaii Disability Rights Center.
Aloha, I'm Rachel Yergin with Aging with Grace. Please join us every Tuesday on thinktech.com.
Hello, I'm Stephen Katz, and I'm the host of Shrink Wrap, which comes to you live every Tuesday at 3 p.m. on thinktechhawaii.com, and then it's repeated again whenever you want if you go to the website. On our show, we will be talking to all different kinds of therapists, psychologists, psychoanalysts, psychiatrists, people who talk about the mind, the brain, and about different ways to find happiness. I myself am a marriage and family therapist in practice here in Hawaii, and I hope you will join us because I've got a lot to learn, you've got a lot to learn, and it's a great ride. Thanks a lot. See you soon.
You can ask anything you
Thank
want.
you. Returning from a short break, this is Carol Mon Lee, Life in the Law, with my guest, Lou Erteschik from the Hawaii Disability Rights Center. He's the executive director and a longtime friend who's been involved in so many different things in our community. So thank you.
No, I'm happy to be here.
So I have one question from the audience.
Oh, great.
Would your center get involved if, in the case of, let's say, an individual reports, has gotten fired from reporting some kind of a...
Oh, like a whistleblower?
Yes, exactly.
Kind of a
Whistleblower,
situation?
yes.
Well, it would depend. I mean, there are separate laws that protect whistleblowers.
Right.
I guess I would say it would depend. If the person was, we do get involved in some employment discrimination kinds of work.
You do?
Right. I mean, so.
And you overlap then with the EEOC?
Well, typically what we do is, I mean, in some cases we might just refer them to the EEOC or the Civil Rights Commission for the state of Hawaii, and they would often have to first conduct the investigation and then either issue a right to sue letter or however they're going to handle it. But there the issue then is that the person was either fired or not accommodated because of their disability. I guess in the case of a whistleblower, the issue would have to be, you know, was it disability related or not, or was if it's just a straight whistleblower case, maybe not. I mean, one of the misconceptions that I think people have is that they think that we are an all-purpose agency that does everything for folks with disabilities, whereas in truth, the way the federal government lays out what the parameters of what we handle, the legal issue that we take on has to really be because of the disability. So if you're a person with a disability and then you want to get a divorce, let's say, we don't do that, right? I mean because it has nothing to do with your disability. But if you were discriminated against in your employment,
couldn't get housing.
You couldn't get housing. We do cases under fair housing where somebody is maybe denied housing because of their disability, maybe denied an accommodation that they request because of their disability. The trickier cases sometimes are where you see people that are exhibiting behaviors that are annoying their neighbors, and if the behavior may very well stem from a mental illness. And so, so in those cases, we've tried to argue that maybe they should be entitled to an accommodation because of their mental illness. But there too, you have to have sort of a treatment plan. I mean, having a disability doesn't necessarily give you an excuse to otherwise engage in behavior that's inappropriate. So you would have to have like a treatment plan to show that the behavior is under control or things like that, right? But so I don't know if that answers your question or not, but if it's just a whistleblower case, maybe not.
Maybe not, okay, right. So tell me long range, where do you see the Hawaii Disability Rights Center going in the terms of whether it's the caseload or the types of issues that you have to face?
I hope that we're always going to be,
challenges?
I mean, I guess I look at I've been here about 12 years, and I was a staff attorney for a good number of that time. I've been a director for 4 years. I guess when I became the director, and I think when the board was asking me, then what did I want? And so I kind of thought that my goal then essentially was that on the individual level, I wanted every person out there with a disability to think that, hey, if you got a problem, call us and maybe we can help and we can get you some results and we can take action on your behalf. On the larger level, I wanted us to be seen as kind of a respected, responsible voice to advocate for the rights and for the issues that folks with disabilities are concerned about. So I would like to see us always be in that situation. In the future, I want more and more folks with disabilities, presuming they have a legal issue that we can address, think that, hey, I'm going to call these guys because they're going to do something for me. And I want to see us involved in emerging issues. I mean, we're involved.
What are some of the emerging
So like we
issues?
talked about, like the Macon case against the developmental disabilities. We had a similar case with the Adult Mental Health Division where they cut back on services, and we brought a lawsuit against them.
So this is the state adult mental health division.
Yeah, also within the health department, right.
Within the Department of Health, and they had a funding issue, so they were cutting, is that right?
A
Their
lot of
budget
it,
was
yeah,
cut?
I think it probably went back to the Lingo administration when they were reducing their funding, right? And so they cut back in terms of eligibility for services, which was, to me, I mean, a huge mistake. I mean, that is really not the population that you want to save money on, because, I mean, it's a volatile situation. The needs are great. Not to pit one group of disabilities against another, but there are some disabilities that are a little more docile and compliant and aren't necessarily gonna act out if they don't get the services that they need. But that population is really a powder keg that you're fooling around with. So we didn't think it was a good idea. So we brought a lawsuit. We got some of those services restored, at least for a period of time. We're working on a case now. We've been fortunate. We've tried to reach out and partner with, Paul Alston's firm has been wonderful in terms of partnering with us, and so we're involved in a couple of cases right now. One is to force the state to cover certain kinds of therapy for children with autism.
So right now, it's not covered.
It was not covered for up until the time we filed the lawsuit, which was about a year ago. And so the state is now beginning to come into compliance. They were out of compliance with the law before that, but they are coming into compliance now.
So you mean the law was that the state had to provide therapy for autism, children with autism?
Yes.
But they were not.
They were not.
Because
they didn't want, well, I don't know if they didn't want to, but they didn't have the money. There's a federal law called, the acronym is EPSDT, and it's early periodic screening, diagnosis, and treatment. And essentially what it says is that if a child is on Medicaid, they're supposed to get health screenings, and if something shows up and the doctor says that you need this kind of treatment to ameliorate the effects of this condition, then the state has to cover that, even if Medicaid generally doesn't cover it. And so under that law, they have to cover what they call applied behavioral analysis, which was and is a certain kind of therapy that's actually had pretty good luck in terms of treating autism. I mean, the incidence of autism is just skyrocketing to the point it's like now it's like 1 in 80 or something like that. And so this is not like, the bubonic plague or something like that. This is not like 1 in 10 million people get it. This is an entire generation of kids that are growing up like that. And
what do you think our population in Hawaii of children with autism
There's a lot of people. I mean, I don't know if I have the numbers offhand, but I mean, if you look at the math, I mean, in terms of, and one time it was 1 in 100, then it went down to like 1 in 80. Now I think it's down to like 1 in 60. So it's a lot. I mean, it really is. I mean, think of that. Think of sitting in a legislative hearing room or something like that. I mean, you got that many people easily a lot of times. That means one of them, potentially would have a child with autism. And if you don't do anything, you're sort of doomed to a pretty grim life in many ways. And so applied behavioral analysis gives them, their success rate is pretty good. It's about 50%. Have fully hit certain benchmarks within like a so-called normal range, and everybody has shown some improvement. So the law says that they got to cover it, and they were not.
And that's your role to represent in this case, the class of children.
We just had a motion to certify the class that was heard yesterday. That's being taken under advisement. But yes, Paul Alston's firm actually took the case on. And we are co-counsel and a plaintiff because we have organizational standing, right. And we have an actual mother and child case, as well. And so our hope is that an entire generation of children are now going to be better off because of the kind of work that we're doing. And so I see that as a wonderful kind of an opportunity to do something for those people. Yes.
Wonderful. I know from your background, because we've known each other for decades now, it seems, that you've done a lot of work at the legislature. So I assume I can tell that that's really been a great help background in what you do for the center.
I think it has helped. I mean, as you know, right? I was a staff attorney at the legislature for many years. I worked with the Department of Health, and back in those days, they used to loan people to the legislature. So I spent 14 sessions at the legislature. So, for better or worse, I learned a lot, I guess. And I am a big believer in the legislative process, and I am a big believer that public policy decisions really do impact people's lives, and that if you want to make change, I graduated law school in the early to mid 70s, so I, like a lot of people of that generation, were caught up in the politics of that era, and I still really haven't changed all that much. I mean, other than, getting a little older and grayer, but fundamentally, I mean, my views are still along those lines of trying to really help the people who need it the most. And so, as a lawyer, you can often do that, obviously, and we do. But how many times as a lawyer might you have a client where you say, geez, I know you're getting a raw deal, but that's the law. And so to the extent that you can change the law and get involved in that, I think is a real opportunity to articulate the needs. And so, so my experiences at the legislature, relationships that I may have made, either with some office holders or staffers, a lot of them who are still around. So those kinds of things I think are always helpful. And so I wanted us to be considered a responsible voice for the folks with disabilities. And I think because I worked there for a long time, I think I do have some credibility that way. And so I do think it's helpful, sure. And so I want to try to use that to help the population that we're trying to serve.
Do you have any bills this session that you're?
There's no bills this session that we are actively pushing. We were very active within the last couple of years on a bill to mandate private insurance coverage for autism, because insurance companies were not required to cover this applied behavioral analysis therapy. And so, that's a state-by-state issue. And so
what happened?
It took several years, as you can appreciate. At first, the insurance companies didn't want it. HMSA and some of the others, were fighting. They were afraid of the costs. And I think over time, like a lot of things over time, I think people came to the realization that it's not really going to cost as much as they think. It may save money.
Right, preventative,
Yeah,
right.
Exactly, because it's not like, it's not like these kids go away, not that I would want that to happen, but I guess in theory, if you could make them go away and disappear, okay, fine. But they don't. They end up in the state developmental disabilities system, and there has been studies at a cost of like $1 million over the course of their lifetime. So if you can get them that therapy that they need at that early point, it makes no sense not to try to do that. So I think that and good lobbying activity by Autism Speaks at the national level. It got to the point where between 30 and 40 states were mandating it. So Hawaii eventually came along. So I say between that and the Medicaid piece with our lawsuit, I think we're helping an entire generation of kids that way. Yeah.
Well, that's a wonderful note to end this show on. Well, thank you so much. We have about 30 seconds. Did you want to give us a pitch of any kind, other than supporting the Hawaii Disability Rights Center and thanking you for all that you do for our community?
Well, thank you. I see us as complementary with other public interest law providers. We do a lot of good work, but there's also legal aid and others, and I think it's important that our justice system really focus on the needs of those who are a little more down and out. And I'm delighted that we can do our part, and I appreciate the chance to share a little of that with you and with everybody else out there. And I hope that if anybody feels that we can help, just give us a call.
Right. And how do we get a hold of the Hawaii Disability Rights Center?
Well, we do have a website. We have a phone number. Do you want me to give you our phone number or this that?
Okay. We just put your website. That's the name of the organization, HawaiiDisabilityRights.org. And
right.
Thank you so much.
Okay, no, thank you. I appreciate your having me.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you. Thank you.
Thank you. Aloha,
Thank you.
and thank you all for joining us today on Life and the Law with our guest, Lou Erteschik from the Hawaii Disability Rights Center. Aloha until next time.